Greetings, this is Sue Herrera. I'm a director of instructional development and a consultant for StepUp. And the purpose of our video today is to talk to you about how you can use our map book and combine it with our walkthrough forms in order to get the most out of your classroom observations and help improve educator practice. Just really quickly, let's go through this StepUp process. We like to start with school districts and schools on step one, where we are looking at how do we create a scope and sequence that clearly puts into place how we're going to meet the priority standards and assess them throughout a school year. And that's in our curriculum management system tool. We're going to pace those priority and supporting standards and create assessments around the priority standards so that we ensure that students are being assessed at a proficient level. The video today really focuses on step 4 and step 5, where we're going to use our map books to improve that tier 1 instruction and teacher practices and engage with educators in instructional focused conversations with collaboration and professional learning. As a former principal, I was always looking for ways to align my efforts to be efficient and effective. And so whatever your scope and sequence is, whether it's a district provided one or one that StepUp has provided and paced with you, we want to make sure that we're looking at our pacing guides and our resources and how those align to the state standards and find those within our Missouri Assessment and Teaching Tool Handbook, whether that be ELA, math, or science. And as a principal, I was always looking for ways to improve teacher craft, their ability to use the art and science of teaching to reach student needs. And that was often couched within the NEE or within the growth guides on DESE, where we were looking at growth indicators for teachers and setting goals. So it's that continuous improvement cycle, that plan, do, study, act cycle, the feedback cycle, getting me out of my office and into a teacher's classroom. And so that's what I hope to cover today. Just really quickly, let's review the MAT. We know that the MAT shows us the priority standard. It tells us what it looks like at an advanced level. And most importantly, it gives us the proficient level indicators. Unwrapping the standard so you as the principal going into a classroom know exactly what it should look like and sound like. And then the examples for educators to help students practice at a proficient level, whether it's the sample stems or the released items. And then the level 2, providing that scaffolding if students aren't quite there yet. So when we look at the level 3 or proficient level, we really want that to be tier 1 instruction or proficiency. And that aligns to the growth educator goals of 3.1, which is curriculum implementation, and then 4.1, critical thinking. The critical thinking for me as an administrator comes in when I hear teachers asking students to think at a proficient level, or I'm using some of these released items so that students can show mastery. When I see students in a small group and the teacher is scaffolding the instruction using the level 2 in the map book, I know it's tier 2 instruction, and that aligns with Educator Growth 2.4 because that is reteaching and scaffolding. And the vocabulary, whenever we're working on vocabulary, whether it's at a tier 3, a tier 2, or a tier 1, that aligns with academic language. And the hallmark of academic language is not only for the teacher to be using it and for it to be displayed in the classroom, but for the students to be able to use the academic language to show that they really understand the meaning. And then if we want to look for differentiation, we would be looking for the ability to enrich a student when they already know the information, or again, to drop back down to the level 2 when we're scaffolding. And that aligns with Educator Growth Guides 2.4 and 3.3. We created an educator walkthrough form at StepUp in order to facilitate conversations on instruction, classroom environment, but also to align to the Educator Growth Guide and the map book. And so this is a screenshot of what it looks like, and we're going to read it in columns. So the priority standard, what is it? And I have hooked the educator growth indicator that's aligned to Department of Ed, if that is something you're using. So the Missouri Priority Standard, the supporting standard, is there a corresponding I can statement put on there for the student? And can the student articulate it? That would align with Educator Growth Guide 7.3. So that's your priority standards. Obviously, we're looking for that in the map book in the table of contents, and we're going to turn to that page so that we can follow along and try to assess and determine at what level is the teacher teaching. The second column is focusing on academic language. Vocabulary development is so important. That's Educator Growth 1.1. So we're looking and listening for, is there academic language posted? Is the teacher using it? Can the student use it? We're going to look at the map book level 2 for the academic language if scaffolding is in place, and can the students use it correctly? And then we're going to look at instruction. What is the mode? How is it being delivered? You have everything from whole group to guided practice to assessments to checking for understanding. And then after using this walkthrough form in a couple of schools, we decided to add this engagement piece. How many students out of how many are engaged? 18 out of 20 is going to look and feel different than 14 out of 20. And sometimes that's information we want as an observer. What sort of critical thinking is being used? At what level? Are we using proficient level questions as evidenced by the map book? Are we using more basic level questions for reteaching? Is there any evidence of collaborative conversations? And then how is that being practiced at the 3 level? Pardon me. And then what is the evidence for differentiation? And remember, the EG stands for educator growth. So 2.4 and 3.3, do we have tiered instruction, tiered assignments? And then I do have a link to the actual form right here. And we have printed these off and we're writing in them and checking off boxes. There's a place for things we want the educator to continue and then suggested feedback or next steps. Reading is so important. And so I'm going to show you a walkthrough form that is specific to reading. This is a close-up of what we just talked about. But let's talk about an ELA form, okay? When you're in classrooms and you're just looking for evidence that reading and writing, speaking and listening are taking place in the classroom at a proficient level, the beginning is pretty much the same with the standard focus, but then we've gone through and we've said, okay, where in ELA are we focused? Is it reading all the way from vocab to shared to choral and dependent centers? Are we doing spelling? Are we doing writing? What kind of writing? Classroom environment is so important when you're talking about ELA, and all of these are evidenced in the map book. We have examples of word walls and anchor charts. Is there student work displayed? Are there book boxes? How is the room configured? And then we're going to get into modes of instruction that are specific to ELA. You're going to see some of the same indicators as you saw on the previous walkthrough form, the level of questioning, how students are practicing, and differentiation. And then once again, the form's going to look very similar to what I just showed you, but just for example's sake, to see that you can see that you can write on it, and then there's a place for notes. We're going to ask, what practices do we want teachers to continue, and what would be immediate steps for feedback? Give me just a minute as I try to move this out of the way. I apologize for the delay. So as we're in school districts, when we're talking about implementing a walkthrough form, and I'm sure every administrator already has a walkthrough process. So the StepUp process is specific to the map book and the pacing of the standards. So our consultants have guided principals and administrative teams in person in these steps. So we go in a classroom and we calibrate our expectations. So each person with a clipboard is marking what indicators they see. Then we want to make sure that we provide immediate positive feedback to the teacher in the form of a Post-it note. And then we step out in the hallway and we meet together as a team and we ask, what would be the next steps for this teacher? What would be some suggestions to improve the teacher's craft in order to be able to teach on grade level, to be able to teach at the proficient level, to be able to increase the rigor, to change the level of engagement, to release learning to the students, maybe to improve the learning environment or what's displayed, what are the anchors for students, and then how could we help teachers model how we're using that curriculum management tool or that map book as a reference. And so the questions that we're asking ourselves if we're in administrative teams is, what do we want the teacher to continue? What's really great about what's happening in the classroom? What's an immediate suggestion for a shift, either in planning, classroom environment, or the level at which they're teaching? And how do I anchor that back to either the curriculum management tool and pacing or the map book? How can I help that teacher use their map book more efficiently? And that provides the continuous improvement cycle. Once you've given the teacher some suggestions using the map book, then we look for opportunities to get right back in that classroom and see those things being implemented with success. So I'd want you to stop right now, just pause the video and answer these two questions. How can this approach enhance what you're already doing that's highly effective? And what would the implications be for teaching and learning if you had a specific walkthrough format that used the map book and the curriculum management tool to get you into classrooms? So go ahead and pause. So some of the ways that I've seen this implemented is I have seen instructional coaches spend time with teams going over their curriculum management tool and then finding the priority standards that are coming up within a unit, looking at the examples at the proficient level and at the level 2, and deciding what am I going to do in the classroom to determine where students are learning. Do they already know the standard? Are they missing the standard, or are they beyond the standard? And how am I going to differentiate instruction? What's going to be a mini lesson? What's going to be a whole group lesson? And then once we've planned it, either the principal or the instructional coach or the team gets into the classroom to observe and watch it unfold. We can refer back to the map book, and we can use this as another barometer, another means for continuous growth as we're putting teachers in that growth model that is the teacher evaluation system. So every time you're in a classroom doesn't have to be evaluative. It can be a learning experience, but I want you to know it can be evaluative also using our forms and the map book. So I hope you've heard something useful today. If you need further information, feel free to reach out to StepUp. We're happy to help however we can.